So this is Friday, the 16th of April 2021. We didn't display the front pages of yesterday's newspapers, but we did discuss at length the evidence concerned and also focused on the record of the conversation that I had, actual conversation I had, the sound of the conversation that I had with Lutfur Rahman in Tower Hamlets outside the Brick Lane Mosque on Friday, the 29th of October 2010. And in those words that I spoke to Lutfur Rahman, I gave him clear warning that if he didn't listen to the advice that I was giving him and I was asking him to receive in context based entirely on the fact, not in any way on my agreement with the fact that there was a post of elected mayor in Tower Hamlets, but the fact that he was incumbent in that post, that if he didn't listen to me properly and extensively and urgently, then he would cause existential damage to the UK Bangladeshi community. In context, all in context. Now that was Friday, the 29th of October 2010. And I gave Lutfur Rahman that warning. And Lutfur Rahman repeatedly said that he would sit down with me after 2 weeks. 29th of October, followed by November 2010, was followed by December 2010, and so on. And this is 11 calendar years since that conversation. Lutfur Rahman did sit down with me, but not in the way that he should have done. And he did sit down with me on 20th of September 2012, and I think in February 2014. But he misbehaved by misorganizing the meeting in February 2014, because he, Lutfur Rahman, broke the law, including the law relating to data protection. He made a series of false statements about that meeting, because at the meeting he had people who were not either employees of the Tower Hamlets Council nor had any right to be there whatsoever, because the contents of the exchanges that took place or were scheduled to be taking place between me and him, Lutfur Rahman, were confidential, covered by data protection laws. So he broke that, and he broke the actual regulations and rules and laws concerning the duties of the council and the confidential nature of the decision making concerning individuals. Now, he also behaved dishonestly because by excluding council employees that would have been properly entitled to attend the meeting and record the actual conversations, he broke the requirements and he denied council employees the access to the information that they should have been entitled to. And he also abused various conventions and the general attitude of generosity that I maintain towards him by inviting someone called Abu Taher, alias Kalam Chaudhry, to that meeting. Abu Taher physically looked rushed and nervous as he entered the room, arrived at the room for that meeting, which means that Lutfur Rahman must have called him as an emergency communication, ordering him to attend that meeting. I say ordering because it seemed that Abu Taher was under the command of Lutfur Rahman at that stage. Now, Abu Taher had no right to attend that meeting because it was confidential. And also, it was confidential about things that I was going to say and discuss. And Lutfur Rahman should have told me that he was going to break the law in advance. The way Abu Taher arrived, he was sweating. So Lutfur Rahman was concerned about the meeting with me. And he needed protection from Abu Taher in relation to any demands, any statement that I would make to Lutfur Rahman based on his record up to that time of lying to me. As it happened, Abu Taher didn't stay for the entire duration of the meeting, but it was an illegal attendance caused by Lutfur Rahman. It wasn't something that Abu Taher caused. I make that clear because Abu Taher would not have had any impact in having any meeting that I would have with anyone in the council where he could demand to be present. And the fact that he was sweating showed that he wasn't there of his own volition, but was ordered to be there. So Abu Taher left the meeting before the meeting finished, and so did Muhammad Jubair, who too, like Abu Taher, should not have been there. So, in addition to the illegality of the attendees that Lutfur Rahman did, Lutfur Rahman actually failed to answer the questions. Questions that had been overdue throughout the previous, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 5 calendar years. So this was a remarkable piece of illegality that Lutfur Rahman indulged in. So after he was kicked out of the post by Richard Morey. A good year after he was kicked out of that post by Richard Morey, in the following year, which is 23rd of April 2015, Alibar Chaudhry told me something that showed that Lutfur Rahman and Alibar had been lying to me the previous 5 years, 6 years, about Colin Cormack, the liar. So anyone watching this must very carefully weigh every single expression that I'm using here. Factual, legal, evidential. And this is only the latest contextual update on the assertion that having an elected mayor in Tower Hamlets is worse than a criminal act, and it should not be allowed to continue. And anyone who wants Tower Hamlets Council to behave halfway, legally and lawfully, must vote on the 6th of May next month against having an elected mayor. We shall be continuing on this theme in due course, of course. Now, looking at the front page of the daily propaganda sheet for the corrupt Boris Johnson, the daily Boris Johnson propaganda corruption sheet, there is a thing on the top of the kind of page. That is the name. That's the name of the cartoonist, the page one cartoonist, who has been given a spot in the propaganda sheet to recall his experience of meeting Brenda's husband, Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Now, the cartoonist is recalling the rare event which is had the day the Duke invited me to lunch. And he recalls that he was invited following his cartoons that he published, he drew for the paper, referring to Philip. And this is something that is part of the narrative that they have been running, Fleet Street has been running. All the papers on the media, including, of course, the BBC, have been running overdone, overrated kind of plugs for the humorous, the intelligent Duke. And the BBC, of course, is under severe condemnation for overdoing its hype and coverage of the death of the husband of Brenda's. And the Boris propaganda sheet graph says today on the front page, Duke planned his funeral with military precision. Now, I mean, this is not news. This is not news that dominate the front page of a so-called national newspaper. There are so many things going on in the world. Absolutely so many things are happening. And yet, there is no recognition of those things on the paper. It's all three main items on the front page. That one, of course, that one is trail, but that one and those two are all about the so-called royal family. I say so-called, not because I don't recognize the existence of the royal family, I do. But by applying so-called, I'm referring to the fraud in the constitutional description of the existence of the royal family. The constitutional fraud is exposed in the two fingers that Johnson and Rees-Mogg showed to the existence of the royal family in the context of the constitution. I mean, instead of allowing what the constitution would have warranted them to do, the monarch to dissolve parliament. Johnson and Rees-Mogg effectively lied and dissolved parliament, prorogued parliament. And they lied, and the lying came across in the procedural steps taken through this court in Edinburgh, in Scotland, as well as in the Supreme Court in this country. But despite that, they have not been held to account. They were not held to account. So therefore, they showed two fingers and got away with it, which meant that although they showed two fingers to the monarchy was supposedly still there, intact. But by their action, in ignoring the existence of the monarchy and the so-called say and the role that the monarchy should have been allowed to play, they in effect scrapped the monarchy constitutionally, or they scrapped the constitutional role of the monarchy. Think about that. So all these hypes in the Fleet Street and by the BBC about the husband of the official monarch is completely overdone and unjustified, because the monarchy is not intact and it is not, in effect, in practice, sovereign. The monarchy is a tool, an extension, a weapon of the regime that controls the government and the state, which is currently fronted by the congenital liar Boris Johnson. And all this propaganda only is justified and justifiable in a private context, in a private kind of forum. Why? Because the world about which this outlets is supposed to be reporting daily is undergoing very severe wrongdoings being committed by all manner of wrongdoers, both in the UK and in the rest of the world. And we start with the UK. Anyone who is familiar with the records of the mainstream so-called media, Fleet Street, in Britain, would be also familiar with the series of lies initiated and perpetrated and perpetuated via Fleet Street and the mainstream BBC and other broadcasters by big business, which is also known as the City of London. Now, anyone who is not familiar with the British scene should know that the phrase City of London is not a reference to a town in London or the town of London or the metropolitan or greater London. It is the name, just like Fleet Street, it is the name given to the collection of big business financial operations in a small part of London and extended in practice to what is called the Canary Wharf in the last, let's say, 20, 25 years, 30 years. And it's the financial criminals, big business crooks, and their share dealings and manipulations and exchanges that are denoted and connoted in the words the City of London. Of course, the same area, physical area, the City of London, is also a local borough in its own uniqueness historically. So it has got a kind of equivalent to chief executives and the leader, but in its own historically worded kind of ways. But that historic kind of continuation of the City of London as an equivalent to a borough is not the same as the operations of the financial criminals, wrongdoers. The center of finance, center of world financial kind of manipulations and other boastful descriptions attached to the big business operating as the financial criminals. Now, people would be familiar with the City of London, which has always been representative of opposition to society, opposition to taxing big business, and has always found one reason or another, one excuse or another to undermine the argument for taxation of those amassing the biggest amount of wealth at the expense of the many. And unlike this program, there is no running commentary about the media as being tools for these crooks and criminals associated with the City of London in the sense that I've just described. In fact, the so-called financial journalists that are included on the list of full-time staff and commenters these journalists are shameless, open, brazen agents and extensions and tools of the big business criminals operating through the City of London and via the various agencies and networks of the City of London and the banks. And the City of London and the banks in this country have been for a very long time the roots and the machines and the tools for the robbery against the many ordinary people, employed and unemployed. So the robbery of the resources of the society and the people is committed, has been committed via the City of London and via the banks. So those who are employed and given platforms as financial and economic experts in Fleet Street, by Fleet Street papers, are not doing the right things. They're not telling the truth about the criminality that is the worst form of capitalism that is going, that maintains the disparity between the many and the few. The few are the kind of main robbing and looting banks and big business, and the many are the ordinary people with sweat and labor and hard work are abused and exploited by the systematic robbery that they perpetrate against the many, thus keeping the many in low income and poverty and denial of their rights, and by maintaining unemployment, homelessness, and other states of disparity and denial suffered and endured by the many. And among those many are other divisions created based on the ethnicity, based race, based hatred and contempt and intolerance. All of these are on the increase in this country. And the increase is taking place with the collusion and complicity of Fleet Street, the newspapers, the Daily Boris Graph, the financial crimes, the daily financial crimes, Daily Mail, Murdoch's Scum, and the Times, and other titles of lie. In none of the daily kind of outlets is there even a pretense of recognizing the experiences of the many. Think about that. This is the latest description of the corruption and criminality of Fleet Street and the mainstream media in this country that justifies, in fact, warrants our program to be called World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. Because no other broadcast is taking place that is putting this on the record. Now here are two items. One is this one, whom we call the stooge, Samira Ahmed, racist stooge. And this one is a victim of racism, This is an Indian woman, Sharon Johal. So we'll be talking about that again because we did talk about Sharon Johal yesterday. We shall be talking about Sharon Johal after we talk about Samira Ahmed. Now that's Samira Ahmed. This is in the Times on page 15 of the Times today, Friday the 16th of April 2021. Remember earlier we mentioned Richard Morey, who ordered the immediate ouster from the office of the elected mayor post of Lutfur Rahman on 23rd of April 2015. Now today is the 16th of April 2021. So in the days up to the 23rd of April, we shall be increasing the content of our updating commentary on the fact that Lutfur Rahman was totally exposed in that order. And anyone who wants to know more about this generally, not about the exclusive contents that we alone have been broadcasting and will broadcast, anyone who wants to know generally the context of Lutfur Rahman being ousted from the post by the election commissioner concerned, Richard Morey, can look up. And the search terms can vary and include the following. Lutfur Rahman, Tower Hamlets elected mayor, election commissioner, electoral fraud, and there would be enough online content accessible even at this stage that will give a general detailed description of the wrongs that Lutfur Rahman did and was found guilty of. Not all the wrongs that Lutfur Rahman did were kind of considered by the election commissioner. And most of the wrongs that we have been publishing were not covered by the petition that Richard Morey was responding to. The petition's terms didn't cover most of the wrongs done by Lutfur Rahman. So we shall be coming to talk about Lutfur Rahman during the next 7 days. That is 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, so next 7 days, starting from tomorrow. Now we talk about this heading to the piece byline to somebody called Jack Blackburn in the Times on page 15 of the Times of today, Friday, 16th of April 2021. And it gives a very kind of positive gloss to this mental slave, racist slave, anti-Muslim liar, Samira Ahmed. She is like a Trojan horse. She has been used as a Trojan horse by the racist BBC. And before that, the racists at Channel 4 had used her as a Trojan horse. And other broadcasting and media outlets in this country have used this same Samira Ahmed as a Trojan horse, Trojan horse is a technical comparison. We are using it to say that her external, including based on her nomenclature, her name Samira Ahmad, is reminiscent of her being of Muslim background. Just about. She is not an advocate of Muslim position in reply to the attacks on Muslims. She is a distorted kind of image of a Muslim who actually does severe damage to the rights of the Muslims to be protected from being lied about. So that is an effective kind of cover. Her name sounds and looks like Muslim, so she can do the more dangerous and far lasting lying against the Muslim identity, the Muslim community, than her counterpart anti-Muslims who are not of Muslim background can ever do. So she's saying that the BBC gave undue promotion to Nigel Farage for too long. Thus enabling the racist. She's not calling him racist, not directly personally, but we are saying on the evidence. Thus enabling the racist, anti-Muslim, liar Nigel Farage to record very significant increases in the support level for UKIP and himself. And she's also, of course, being compared with the racist Jeremy Vine, who was paid more than she was paid for similar program. She fronted Newswatch on the BBC television, and he fronts Points of View. And Jeremy Vine is paid and was paid more than her. And she took action against the BBC over the disparity between her pay and his pay. And she won that claim against the BBC. Now, the reason why she won that case almost entirely rested on the fact that she was not making a claim against the BBC for paying her less because she was a Muslim. In fact, she made the claim against the BBC being dressed in the same way as she usually dresses, but being described in terms of her name, she immediately comes across as a, quote, Muslim or of Muslim background, which is completely unlike anything that the court system does when the claimant is a Muslim, because the court system doesn't behave neutrally towards a Muslim claimant if the claim is against a non-Muslim organization such as the BBC. So the Times is wrong because it doesn't. That report on page 15 today in the Times doesn't reflect the main coverage or cover-ups by the Times of literally hundreds of cases. The same Times today has got a piece about this Indian origin actress Sharon Johal in Australia. And the complaints against the makers of the Neighbours series, on which Sharon Johal did act, revived the racist discrimination culture aimed at people who are not necessarily Muslims but from Asian backgrounds, like Sharon Johal is of in Indian background. But the Indian background people who are not targeted for racist attacks in Australia, where the racist hatred was almost exclusively being targeted against Muslims in Australia. Muslims either from India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or any other background, Indonesia, Malaysia. And that kind of focus has been changed now to include Indians who generally are not considered to be Muslim. They may be of Indian origin, but they're not of the Muslim faith. And the fact that Sharon Johal, who is not a Muslim, has been racistly violated on the sets of the Neighbours series shows that the Australian racists have upped their antes and have widened the spread and the reach of their racist attacks to include all the people, including the Muslims. Now, this piece about Sharon Johal has been published in Britain as well and by The Guardian. And now, today, by The Times. But despite the fact that The Times has published this story, they're not talking about what I'm talking about. That the extension of racist hatred and discrimination against a non-Muslim Asian in Australia is proof that the Australian racist agenda is extending now and is no longer only focused against Muslims. So the question arises about the fact and the extent of the necessary solidarity against these racist assaults and racist attacks and violations being mounted against Asians of all descriptions and backgrounds. And the answer is that there is no solidarity. As is the case in the USA and in the UK, non-Muslim Asians who are generally, ordinarily discriminated against by racists do not support Muslims in response to the racist attacks. This is not a one-off. This is a historic pattern and syndrome. So those who look at the UK or Australia or North America from a distance and have no access to the actual contents of the discrimination, the mechanism, the various stages and manipulations undertaken by the racists against the Muslims and against the non-Muslim Asians, may not realize the extensive ways of denial of the operation of racism. For example, the people that are involved with the Neighbors series as production company or as broadcasters have made banal, that is stupid, incredibly idiotic responses to the allegation highlighted by the statement by Sharon Johal in the last 2 weeks. These production and broadcasting companies make the stupidest possible banality in response to allegations made against them. They say, we are looking into it and we don't tolerate that kind of discrimination, which is completely stupid. For a start, if they don't tolerate that kind of discrimination, then how come that these people are making the claims that they have been discriminated against? And others, witnesses, have said that they have witnessed discrimination as well. So anyone who says we have changed our code of behavior or whatever is of course lying, because the issue is not whether they've changed it or not, but the issue is that they had allowed the racism and discrimination that have been reported. And changing doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be any discrimination of the type or of a different type that has been alleged and has been asserted by the victims and by the witnesses. So the Australian races, remember the mass murderers, well, the mass massacres that took place in the mosques in New Zealand were caused by an Australian racist. And there are other outstanding serious issues caused by Australian racists that warrant action on. But the Australian judiciary, the Australian media, are complicit in the anti-Muslim and anti-Asian agenda that has been in operation for a very long time. Although in terms of finance, in terms of the economic dependence on neighboring to Australia is quite a statement, because Australia itself is a continent, so it's a huge place geographically. And the nearest neighbors with significant Muslim populations are, of course, Malaysia and Indonesia. So the Australian racists, just like the racists in Britain and in North America, are always on maneuvers, trying to find ways to perpetrate racism while at the same time rob and loot the target communities. How does Boris Johnson's racism and anti-Muslim hatred kind of fit in the description? I mean, today's Financial Times carries a report about Johnson due to be meeting the neo-fascist, anti-Muslim, Brahminist nationalist criminal Narendra Modi. And there are various issues that the Financial Times piece refers to, including the fact that India as a state has got a tendency, as a record, of not complying with court orders. But it's not talking about the court orders affecting the human rights of the Muslims or of the Dalits and the scheduled castes, so-called, but it's the court orders affecting finance and manipulations. And there is no mention in the Financial Times of Narendra Modi's crimes against humanity, which omission is not accidental, and that's why we call the Financial Times the financial crimes, because it doesn't actually tell the truth about the finance, or the financial areas and financial manipulations that it covers or covers up. As we say about the United Nations and the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, the attitude of the anti-Muslim Western kind of power holders, individually and institutionally. And this should cover the liars of Boris Johnson's cabal, Munira Mirza, and Tony Sewers. The expression institutional is bogus. And it's a fabricated diversion from the actual fact of racism. So when the Financial Crimes peddles Johnson's imminent meeting with Narendra Modi, the Financial Crimes stays very clear of all references to the violations of the human rights of groups of people, hundreds of millions of people, Indians in India, by Modi. For example, in the current election kind of propaganda by the neo-fascist BJP cabal, which has concentrated its attacks on West Bengal and has focused its hatred against the West Bengal Chief Minister, Mamata Banerjee. It's not just against Mamata Banerjee, but against the human rights of Muslims that are not Indians, people next door Bangladesh, next door to West Bengal, that is. Bangladeshis are openly called termites by Amit Shah, the nefarious anti-Muslim hate spreader on behalf of Narendra Modi. He is on the record several times describing Bangladesh and Bangladeshis as termites. No reference to any wrongdoing by the Bangladeshis, but the very fact that they're Bangladeshis, that they're Muslims, is enough for Amit Shah to condemn them as termites. And he has threatened many times to sink the Bangladeshi termites in the Bay of Bengal. Think about that. So that is what the Financial Times is missing, leaving out. Bangladesh is a state or a country which has got several hundred million people. And in India, the actual population, the Muslim population, is just under 300 million. Many don't register on the census for obvious reasons. And the Fleet Street never recognizes that. Now, 300 or 200 million people, or even 100 million people, is way too big when compared with the population of the majority of the individual Western European states. Of course, even 100 million is more than the combined population of the United Kingdom and Ireland. And most of the Western European countries, states, on average, their population, except Germany, their population is under 30 million. And yet the Financial Times is not referring to the population, not referring to any of those real facts and factors. And the Indian Parliament is an anti-democratic cabal. It's not representative of the majority of the democratically entitled Indians across the country. And the Financial Times, although it refers to the Indian state having a record of defying and not complying with court orders. Actually, financial crimes is ignoring the majority of the behavior of the court and court's bureaucracy in India. So that is the front page of the financial crimes. That is the one. It's talking about deal, it's salivating. The same kind of attitude of intentionally leaving out the violations against human rights and democracy committed by so-called rulers in the Gulf states and in Saudi Arabia. So the Fleet Street cry that they are like platforms of freedom, freedom of speech and freedom of expression is a complete lie. Here is the kind of the only exceptional piece in there is a reference to David Davis, a notorious Brexiteer, but also somebody who has got an inconsistent track record of being concerned about democracy and accountability, etc. As was highlighted in the row that he had with Andy Barnum. After Barnum insinuated that David Davis might have been having a sexual affair with Rita Chakrabarti, Andy Barnum was forced to, of course, apologize. But apart from that incident, or that kind of incident, David Davis is a right-wing member of the conservative agenda. And he is the leading Brexiteer. And as Brexit is a pack of lies and corruption, every staunch kind of peddler of Brexit strategy and claims has been exposed as being incompetent, untruthful, dishonest, irresponsible, uncaring, lacking compassion, not accountable, and all the rest of it. And David Davis has been exposed as well. But in this piece, in the Financial Times on page 1, he is paraphrased as having said, Johnson should stress the need for India to play by the rules. Now, the entire Brexit project was promoted by breaking all the international rules. And here is Davis preaching that India should be asked to play by the rules. And there is a quote, the Indian government's willingness to ignore court rulings will only damage its own national interest, David Davis said. Notice the formulation of that quotation. The Indian government's willingness to ignore court rulings. Davis doesn't say that Indian government has a tendency to ignore court rulings, or that most of the Indian courts bureaucracy is corrupt itself. So there is the contradiction there. Now, the next paragraph says in the Financial Times, under the Downing Street plan, Johnson would announce an intent to negotiate a full FTA, that is a free trade agreement, isn't it? But previously, in the middle of the piece, the Financial Crime says, a person familiar with New Delhi's position was skeptical of a breakthrough. Quote, we haven't seen flexibility from the UK on issues important to India. A full FTA seems far-fetched at this stage. Now, when they say that they haven't seen anything about issues important to India, what they're referring to is that India, regardless of what particular political party or kind of gang is in power, wants access to UK, Indian access to UK, like immigration, migration, whatever the actual details of the individual migrants and immigration. And it goes on. And there is a lot of contradiction in this headline, because the headline is completely misleading and completely exposed as misleading by the contents in the copy. And that India is not an important economic partner or a trading partner, let's say, because the share of India's imported goods and services, that is from UK, imported from UK, fell from 6% and 2.1%, no, 6% and 11% in the year 2000 to 1.3% and 2.1% respectively. And it goes on to say, the Financial Times, not within quotations, the UK does more trade with Belgium than with India. Well, that sums up what I said, that the average Western European country has got tinier populations than the hundreds of millions of the Indian people, Indian Muslims, and Indians, non-Hindus and non-Brahmins, that are violated by the Indian status quo. So there is an additional comment by Helen Thomas on page 12 about this spin for Johnson in relation to India. Remember what Johnson was known to the recently retired French ambassador to London, to the UK. I mean, this woman was in London for several years. And after she retired, she spoke to the Times, London Times, whom she told about Boris Johnson. And she said that Johnson was a congenital liar. And because he is a congenital liar, the UK is worse off by the fact that he is at the front of the government. That's what this French ambassador, recently retired, has told the Times newspaper about Boris Johnson. And there is this Helen Thomas, who is adding a kind of clarification, cautionary clarification against this Boris Johnson hype, India hype, that is actually mocking one of the phrases used by the liars, Brexiteering liars, about global Britain. I mean, this propaganda about India doing, or Johnson starting to do business, Brexit business, or post-Brexit business with India is explained by this Helen Thomas, who is saying in the first paragraph, the Prime Minister is headed to India, keen for an accord in support of global Britain. Then she says, it's a shame the government isn't as eager to defend past deals on behalf of UK PLC. While the government tries to lay down foundations for a stronger economic partnership and further its tilt towards Indo-Pacific region, oil and gas explorer Cairn Energy is preparing to seize Indian government assets under a long-running dispute. An international tribunal ruled last December that New Delhi had breached obligations under the bilateral investment treaty between the UK and India. This was the culmination of years of wrangling. After the India Tax Department in 2014 launched a retrospective investigation of Cairn that resulted in the Indian authorities seizing and selling most of a remaining stake in Cairn India. Last year's ruling by the International Tribunal ordered New Delhi to pay Cairn $1.2 billion in damages plus interest and costs. Instead, New Delhi, which argues this is a question of its sovereignty right to tax, its sovereign right to tax, last month petitioned a Dutch court to set aside the arbitration award, something that only happens in very limited circumstances. And so therefore there is a longer kind of detail by Helen Thomas, whose last paragraph says, there is a principle at stake here. The government should be relied on to stand up for its own international treaties and deals. By government, she means the UK. Otherwise, global Britain isn't worth the paper it's written on. So the Financial Times itself carries this clarification, which completely contradicts the headline on the front page. that cars and whiskey to the fore as Johnson chases challenging India trade deal. It's empty, bogus. That's what the Financial Times admits. But there is another plug for the looters and robbers. This time the ones based in Wall Street. Wall Street is the equivalent in America to the City of London in terms of finance. And this is a particularly poisonous staff writer on the Financial Times, now based in USA. It's a woman called Gillian Tett. I mean, she's a thoroughly prejudiced and racist individual. When I say racist, I mean race is not part of the content, the superficial, the apparent content of her piece, Gillian Tett, T-E-T-T. But if you look at the relationship between the UK businesses as fronted by Boris Johnson cabal, and even as fronted by the crook, well, the other crook, Cameron, in his lobbying of Saudis, it is very clear that while the Western media and Western regimes and politicos keep hammering at and battering the image and denying the rights of Muslims, they are among the closest of the suckers of the energy out of the Muslim sources, the entire Gulf kind of states and the Saudis are sources of trillions of dollars and pounds of robbery committed by the US ones and the UK ones, the big business crooks and criminals. And so, although Wall Street is based in the USA, City of London based in the UK, they will not operate, they will not function if they stop sucking the energy out of the Muslim-owned lands. I mean, the reason why they murdered Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi has nothing to do with democracy, human rights, and accountability. It's all to do with oil, whatever form, post-pandemic or whatever. Oil remains a key definer of wealth and a key medium and resource for theft and robbery and looting. And the robbers and looters of the oil and other natural resources and minerals from the region covered by the so-called Middle East and therefore Muslim, and other, including India, which are a mixture. The Muslims don't get a mention, but they are there. And the proportionate, or rather the proportions of wealth looted and robbed from Muslims, hundreds of millions of Muslims in India, deserves a proper audit and adding up. And we shall be doing that. Because it will actually benefit the whole of Indian population. Just as the Muslims and the Dalits have been robbed and looted for the last 75 years, the people across the northeastern states in India are also victims of lootery and robbery. And they need to be recognized and the rights recognized. And India needs to be made accountable to all Indians, which it isn't now. This is Samir Ahmad again, and this is Sharon Johal, the victim of the neighbors' racism in Australia. We should be talking about India, Sharon Johal, Australia, Financial Times, and the BBC in due course. This is 12:05 hours GMT, and I have just written a tweet which reads as follows: Muslim named tool of anti-Muslim barriers, Samira Ahmed, wrongly promoted by Fleet Street, as belatedly intentionally inventing a conscientious retrospection expressing false regret about aiding and abetting anti-Muslim racist Brexiteering liar Nigel Nasty Farage. That is what I have just written. That is called my typical kind of caption or statement. Fully packed with lots of information. And it is a style as well as the substance that are very much my own creation. Because this limitation of words that are imposed on tweets makes it necessary to make one particular statement make sense concerning a lot of issues. So reading that caption again, the tweet: Muslim named tool of anti-Muslim barriers, Samira Ahmed, wrongly promoted by Fleet Street, as belatedly intentionally inventing a conscientious retrospection, expressing false regret about aiding and abetting anti-Muslim racist Brexiteering liar Nigel Nasty Farage. This is about the piece on Samira Ahmed in the Times today, which is headed, I'm haunted by fear that BBC boosted UKIP, says presenter. Now, of course, she always boosts anti-Muslim racists. So there is a piece in the Guardian posted at 10:50 UK time, which is coincidental to or coincides with the GMT, which is 10:50 GMT today. And it says, it's under opinions. Why were Bangladeshi and Pakistani groups worst hit by the UK's second wave? By Laura Baer. I led a SAGE report on the effects of inequality during COVID and the urgent need to address racism in our public services. Note the phrase, the urgent need to address racism in our public services. And it describes Laura Baer as professor of anthropology at the London School of Economics and leader of the SAGE Ethnicity Subgroups report. We shall talk more about this one. The piece about neighbors in Australia in the Times says, in a statement on the subject issued previously, Fremantle said, we do not tolerate behavior that does not align to our anti-discrimination policy, and we take all complaints very seriously, investigating all allegations. It says it doesn't tolerate behavior that does not align to their anti-discrimination policy. It doesn't say that we oppose racism and we shall take action, including by sacking and so on, but none of that is there. So that is a racist defensiveness. And there is a piece about Burma, which I shall read the first paragraph of. Burma's ousted ambassador, I'm changing to Burma, all references to Myanmar. Burma's ousted ambassador will be offered asylum if he formally requests it. The Times understands. He had yet to apply to remain as a refugee yesterday, hours before a midnight deadline issued by the military regime for him to leave the official residence. Now, however it is spelled, I'll pronounce it in the way that I can. Kiewa Zawar Min was ordered to leave a week after Burma's military attaché locked him out of the embassy, and the Foreign Office received formal notice that his job had been terminated. Now, this piece is about Burma. And it doesn't refer to the genocide. If it does, we shall update our commentary, but it doesn't, on the reading that I've just made of this piece. And that is the problem with the Western media coverage of the Burmese coup of the last 6 weeks. A genocide affecting the lives and the existence and survival of millions of people in Burma, the millions of Muslims, is far more devastating. This is not accepting the murders and errors and massacres of the current coup's victims. No way. But in comparison with the numbers affected by the genocide, this has to be said that this genocide is being forgotten, thus proving the point that I have been making from the very start, that this coup is part of the agenda by the perpetrators of the genocide, who want to divert attention from the genocide. And that benefits Aung San Suu Kyi, who is transformed in propaganda terms into a victim again of the Burmese military. But she was the commander, she was the head of the regime that included the Burmese military that carried out the genocide against the Muslims. That's a very interesting indeed, and absolutely acceptable statement by this very rare kind of contributor to the Times, this woman called Anne Treneman. Almost every time she publishes something, there is something of interest. And here she says, if you want a memorial, plant a tree, not a statue. It's a completely self-evident, sensible statement. And we accept that. The idea that Prince Philip should be honored with a statue is madness. Have we learned nothing over the past year? Of course, the Duke might revel in the sheer unfashionability of it all, but it is unlikely that a man whose motto could have been to fuss please, could have been no fuss please, would want the monumental faff that a statue involves. A far better idea can be found in a living memorial. I speak, of course, of trees. The entire nation needs trees for health, well-being, beauty, and urgently. Modern farming and urban development have taken their toll, and now just 13% of our country is covered in woodland. France has 31%. Both town and country need more and sooner rather than later. The government should do more, but why wait for it? Every community could plant a tree in honor of a man who was a conservationist before his time. In 20 years, a statue will look the same, except for the inevitable barred residue. But the Duke's memorial will have grown into things of beauty. We agree. And there is a Peter Brooks cartoon of the Times today, which is showing Eton, Oxford MP, PM, and the cliff. The evolution of Crooked Cameron. That is what I mean, the title should be called Evolution of the Crook, not Cam, but the Crook. But it does get it across. There is a crafty headline written by a sub-editor, no doubt. That's one. The one about Islamophobic ad has Evian in hot water. Evian has been criticized by French conservatives after its apology to Muslims for an advert posted on social media on the first day of Ramadan. So it's not in hot water because of Muslims, but because of anti-Muslims in France. So you can see that the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street keeps producing evidence of the extent of anti-Muslim prejudice and racism in the Fleet Street papers. And today's Times is no different from the other day's Times. The letters to the editor in the Times are racistly selected. The list of writers of the letters printed is a giveaway. So the Times is leaving out the whole world. That is the wisdom, the intelligence, the insight, and the perspectives, ethical and moral perspectives of the whole world, and focusing on the contributions, standpoints, and views of a very, 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 very small minority of the world's population. So there is another lying piece by Madeline Grant. Madeline Grant is one of the young white women overly given platforms by the lying Boris Graf. I mean, the Boris Graf is completely devoid of any ethics or morality, except the little piece in the piece by Matt, the cartoonist, who gives a straightforward, factual account of his meeting with Philip. Apart from that, the Telegraph is corrupt to the core. Now, this piece on the same outlet, the Torygraph, Borygraph, in the business section, and headed flexible rail ticket plan to lure back commuters, is as stupid as it can get. Because travels on the railways have been going down in numbers, and they're set to go down even further. Because of actually prohibitive costs of travel. But this is a token flexibility that is far too inadequate. But this heading on page 4 of the business extra is absolutely spot on. Well, this part is anyway. The last 3 words in this heading: Taylor Swift, Japanese nukes, the All Blacks, and the crisis in capitalism. That's the one that I think is accurate. Factually, Taylor Swift's publication of her own version of her own music, stolen in effect from her, is going to be discussed at length in our update on the attack on the Kitten's house in Brick Lane in August 2012. And the corruption of the regime, and in the personification of corruption by Luther Roma during the calendar years 2010, until Luther Roma was kicked out of the post by the licensed law trader, also known as a QC, barrister Richard Morey, in April 2015. So this piece about Bangladeshi and Pakistani groups worst hit by the UK's second wave. It doesn't admit it, but it is in effect saying exactly what we have been saying, that it is anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim prejudice. That is the reason for the disproportionate number of Pakistanis and Bangladeshis suffering and being victims of worse effects of the second wave of the virus in the UK. We shall be talking more. This is 12:32 hours GMT on Friday, the 16th of April 2021.